Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadeshataya. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna
Krishna
Jai, so welcome to the Sunday Feast class. Seem to be a little bit hoarse. So before we read the verse and start the class, I hope I get my voice back in a minute, we're going to do another little bit of singing. It's some prayers that we sing before we usually give a talk. But I just want to give a quick message to Surumi that my laptop has gone off. So if you need to communicate with me, it'll just have to be through WhatsApp. And then at the end of the class, I'll try to get the laptop working again. Okay, I'm just going to drink a little bit more water. Okay. Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girivaradhari, Jaya Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yashodanandana Vraja Januranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Gaur Premanandi. Haribol. So the singing voice seems to be okay, but the speaking voice is a bit croaky for some reason, so we'll try our best. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jai. So today we're reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 2, text 40. So I'm going to read the Sanskrit through a couple of times and then do the word for word and then the translation. Nehabikramo nashosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bayat. I'll do it again. Nehabikrama nashosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bayat. And then the word for word. Na, there is not. Iha, in this yoga. Abhikrama, in endeavouring. Nashaha, loss. Asti, there is. Pratyavaya, diminution. Na, never. Vijate, there is. So alpam, a little. Api, although. Asya, of this. Dharmasya, occupation. Trayate, releases. Mahata, from very great danger. From very great, bayat, danger. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In this endeavour there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Purport. Activity in Krishna consciousness, or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification, is the highest transcendental quality of work. Even a small beginning of such activity finds no impediment, nor can that small beginning be lost at any stage. Any work begun on the material plane has to be completed, otherwise the whole attempt becomes a failure. But any work begun in Krishna consciousness has a permanent effect, even though not finished. The performer of such work is therefore not at a loss, even if his work in Krishna consciousness is incomplete. 1% done in Krishna consciousness bears permanent results, so that the next beginning is from the point of 2%, whereas in material activity without 100% success there is no profit. The Jamil performed his duty in some percentage of Krishna consciousness, but the result he enjoyed at the end was 100% by the grace of the Lord. There is a nice verse in this connection, in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17. Chaktva swadharmam charanam bhujam harer bhajana pakvotapatetato yadi yatra kvavabhadrama buddha mushikim kovarta apto bhajatam swadharmata. If someone gives up his occupational duties and works in Krishna consciousness, and then falls down on account of not completing his work, what loss is there on his part? And what can one gain if one performs his material activities perfectly? Or, as the Christians say, what profiteth a man if he gain the whole world, yet suffers the loss of his eternal soul? Material activities and their results end with the body, but work in Krishna consciousness carries a person again to Krishna consciousness, even after the loss of the body. At least one is sure to have a chance in the next life of being born again as a human being, either in the family of a great cultured Brahmana or in a rich aristocratic family. That will give one a further chance for elevation. That is the unique quality of work done in Krishna consciousness. Om Jnanatimurandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who has established within this material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Vishnaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tikoni Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravan Charani Vishesha Shani Bhadi Paschashtesh Tare. I'll just read the translation of the verse one more time. In this endeavour there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Jai. So I noticed a couple of weeks ago that Ananda Hari Prabhu also spoke on this verse. I was only asked a couple of days ago to give the talk today, and I already had this verse prepared for another class that didn't really end up happening, so we end up speaking about the same verse, but that's okay anyway, because no two talks are ever the same, and it's such a great verse that there's just so much that can be said about it. So I particularly like this verse because it's just so positive. And I was thinking about how, well, spiritual life is a wholly positive thing anyway. It may not always appear like that at different stages or to different people. And there are reasons for that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But for me it's a very positive verse because it takes one aspect of this process and elaborates something which is so hopeful. So the spiritual process, you know, it's a science, and it's when I first came to Krishna consciousness, the first book I consciously read, I had a pamphlet that I came across before that, but the first book I consciously read was called The Science of Self-Realization. And that really struck me because, coming from the background that we grew up in, we have, I guess, an implicit faith in science, even if we may not realize it or be aware of it. And I also knew I was looking for some kind of self-discovery. I didn't know it was called self-realization at that time, but I was looking for something. And when those words all came together in the same title, The Science of Self-Realization, I just knew that there was going to be answers in that book for me. So the spiritual path is a scientific path, and that may be surprising to people when they first come across a spiritual process. They may not think of it as a scientific thing, but I've been thinking about how this actually applies to any practice of spiritual life by anybody, anywhere. In this process of Krishna consciousness, it's very elaborately described, it's very nicely explained. There's so many details, there's so many books handed down from, you know, millennia, which in our experience answer every question that there is to be asked. But at the same time, this science is for any practitioner of any process, in the sense that anyone who's practicing a genuine spiritual process is going to go through the same stages of development and self-realization. They may not know that because it may not be so clearly described and explained, but still it's going to be happening. And different religious traditions explain and describe different elements of philosophy. In the introduction to this Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada says, as far as I can remember, that in this Bhagavad Gita, or in this philosophy, you will find everything which is to be found elsewhere, but you will also find things which are not to be found anywhere else. And I was thinking about how, you know, growing up with the background of Christianity, there's this less philosophical explanation and this concept of extremes of good and bad. And, you know, these days, I think people even shudder to some extent to hear those words, in some ways, good and bad, even though we can't avoid using them. But when they're connected to the idea of a religion, it can cause an adverse reaction in people, because how it's been presented has been, I think, you could almost say traumatic for some people, the way that the religious process has been presented and the connotations that go along with that. So, growing up with the idea of two choices, heaven or hell, good and bad forever, it has a particular effect on the consciousness and on the mind. And, what we see in reality is that people aren't wholly good in general or wholly bad. They're a mix of all of these things. And when you limit philosophical understanding to just extremes like that in black and whites, it becomes very difficult to describe the path and how to progress in it, because we see that there is this mix of different desires, different intentions, different motivations, different habits, different activities, and they come and go, and people have different degrees of all of those. I heard one devotee explaining that when you limit philosophical understanding to being wholly good or wholly bad, then what you have to do is you have to really simplify it to the extent that to be good becomes a very low bar, because most people don't attain complete success of spiritual life by the end of one lifetime. So just to believe then becomes the qualification for your return into the spiritual world. But we see that human life is a variety of, like I'm saying, all these different types of consciousness. I was remembering when His Holiness Bhakti Brihat Bhagavat Swami was in Ireland one time giving a class, and he explained, I thought it was a helpful explanation, he said there are 3 types of, how did he put it now? 3 types of consciousness in human bodies. So you can have human bodies but with a very undeveloped consciousness, which he called it animal life in human bodies, but another way of explaining that is just a very undeveloped consciousness. And then you can have human life in human bodies, where people have come to the stage of understanding how to live in order to develop better qualities. And then spiritual life in human bodies is when someone actually manages to start to awaken their spiritual identity, which is within. So this is the highest stage, and this is what's explained in the Bhagavad Gita here, and which is also explained in spiritual traditions, that the goal of life is to awaken this more developed stage within us, which is the real us, actually. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is how the true application of spiritual life is that it's completely not sectarian. And this is, I think, one of the very misunderstood things in the world. It doesn't take much thought or examination to realize, to remember how many wars and problems and disagreements and troubles and prejudice and discrimination have come about on the name, in the name of religion, on the name of identifying one religion to be either better than another, better than all others, or even the only way. But actually, I was thinking how in the process of Krishna consciousness we understand that there are different stages of development, and in the lower stages that tendency to be sectarian is very much present in the beginning. But the more one develops and the more one awakens their understanding and expands their consciousness, the more they start to see the essence of what spirituality is. And so true spirituality is an understanding that anybody practicing a genuine spiritual path, and we could ask, well, what does genuine mean? What is a genuine religious tradition? So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, in the Bhagavad Gita we learn that we're to understand who we are, who the Supreme Person, or God, or Krishna, or Allah, or whatever you want to call him, We are to learn who He is and what our relationship is with Him. So who we are is very much dependent on understanding our relationship with the Supreme Person. It can't be understood in isolation or separate from this. So a genuine spiritual tradition will show people how to develop this understanding of who they are and who God is and what the relationship is. So any tradition that's doing this, they're actually going to be going through the same stages of development that we're going through, even if they don't know it, even if it's not described philosophically so well in the particular scriptures. And there's one definition Srila Prabhupada gives. The word Mahatma. He's speaking about it's a conversation. I think it's in an arrival address. I think so. And he's speaking about the meaning of the word Mahatma, and he describes how the word Mahatma means someone who has developed his consciousness and expanded his consciousness to the extent that he is able to feel compassion and care for a large number of living entities. Whereas the Duratma, in comparison, has a very narrow consciousness in which he's only able to care for himself or a few people in connection with him that are dear to him, or that give him some security or comfort or pleasure in life. But the Mahatma, he's actually expanding his consciousness to include all living entities. And so as one practices the spiritual path, this is what happens. The consciousness starts to move away from being self-centered and self-absorbed and selfish to thinking more about other people, other living entities, the welfare of all people and all living entities, and to understand that the same spirit soul is not only within all people but within all animals, all plants, all living entities. But even within the spiritual path, it can be still easy, it can still be a trap to fall into considering our own particular group superior in some way, better in some way. And the more one develops, the one moves more towards the higher stages of consciousness and away from the Kanishta Adhikari platform, more towards the Majjhima, the more he starts to see people as servants of God, and the more he starts to see that people are serving God in many, many ways. And as one devotee mentioned recently in a class, yes, it's natural to think that the tradition that we belong to is the best, but it's important to distinguish that it's the best for us, but it doesn't mean that's the best way for absolutely everybody. People will have their different flavors. People will situate themselves according to where they're carrying on from in their last life, which again links back to this verse and purport here, which is how spiritual life continues on and is never lost, whereas material activities are finished at the end of the body. So, just to finish this bit about consciousness, then we go back to the purport. The broader the perspective one has, the more one can see the spirituality in other people, and to try to help everyone to bring out the essence of understanding who they are and their love for God. If we read the scriptures and we don't have, everybody should read the scriptures, and they're purifying and they're beneficial, but one who reads the scriptures with a less developed consciousness will quite likely take a different meaning from one who reads the scriptures with a more developed consciousness. And again, one can read the scriptures and come away with a sectarian or narrow-minded viewpoint, whereas a devotee who's been practicing for some time, who's made some progress, who's moved more towards the Majjhima platform, will read the scriptures in a different way and see more the essence of the message, there's more qualities there of compassion, tolerance, humility. So it's very important that we associate with as many people who've made genuine advancement as possible, so that they can actually help us to understand what is in our philosophy. So, to come back what I started off saying, spiritual life is an all positive thing. And sometimes it doesn't look like that, because, you know, in the beginning we're shifting our lives. We're changing from having lived more materialistic lives. There's a concept that we're giving things up. That can seem difficult, painful, austere, and it may not look, you know, it may not feel very easy, and it may not look very attractive. So spiritual life may not always seem positive to us, but the more we go on, the more we develop, the more we start to understand that the reason it's positive is because it benefits us more than all the other things that we do or have done, and that it's, as it says in this verse, it's eternally beneficial, it's everlasting. So it's actually, when we look at it, the only thing really worth doing, because everything else has a temporary result. Whereas our spiritual practice just keeps on progressing and progressing and building momentum, more and more momentum. So actually there's one astrologer that I sometimes listen to. He's not a devotee as such, he's a follower of Amma, but I quite like his astrological calculations. And I was listening to him some time back, and he started speaking. Yeah, he was explaining some difficult times that were coming ahead, and people can type in questions while he's speaking and get their questions answered, you know, live. So one person typed in and said, okay, these difficult times are coming, but won't sadhana help to counteract these things? And he laughed and he said, won't sadhana help? He said, that's like asking, won't eating and drinking help to keep you alive? He said, of course sadhana helps. It's the only thing that actually really does help. And to be honest, I must say that when he said that, it was, out of all the things I've heard in all these years of practice and reading books and listening to lectures, that was up there in the top, you know, I don't know, top dozen things that anyone ever said that struck me. And he said sadhana is the only thing that the real person, the soul, actually needs, and all the other things that we do, they're for the body. So again, he's following a different tradition, but he has the same understanding about sadhana. So this is what's being explained in this verse, that actually the only thing that's really, you know, in the long run worth pursuing is our spiritual practice and our spiritual goals, because all of our material activities are impermanent, and well, they create reactions as well. So actually it mentions somewhere in the purport here, activity in Krishna consciousness, or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification, is the highest transcendental quality of work. And again, somewhere else in the purport, work in Krishna consciousness carries a person again to Krishna consciousness, even after the loss of the body. So in the purport here, Srila Prabhupada is distinguishing between two types of activities. And really, when you look at you know, the nature of people in the world, people are acting, they're doing things all the time, they're active. There's a verse later on in the Bhagavad Gita, actually, maybe I just find it. Yeah, 3.5. Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, it's not a question of embodied life, but it's the nature of the soul to be always active. So the soul is active, people are active, and they do things, you know, as Prabhupada's explaining in the purport, they can't help from doing things, they can't stop even for a minute. So we have to do stuff in this world, you know, we have to perform some actions and activities. And what Prabhupada's pointing out in the purport here is that there's a choice. There's activities in material life and there's activities in Krishna consciousness, and they achieve very, very different results. So basically, our material activities, you know, what does that mean? What's the definition of a material activity? Well, I understand that it means we're doing something to get some result for ourselves because we're motivated. You know, we're always looking for some happiness, some enjoyment, or some shelter. So we choose to do something where we think we're going to find one of those things, or all of those things, hopefully. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, in the scriptures, that's described as fruitive. We want something from it. But the problem with that is that there's reactions. So all of our activities, they have a karmic reaction. Karma, as far as I know, comes from the word, written down somewhere, kri, which means to do, so to act, that's kri. And there's results for everything that we do, so there's good and bad results, to use those terms again. One devotee describes it as actions that which cause transmigration of the soul, or activities which lead to production of future material bodies. So that's the problem of acting not in Krishna consciousness, that we're bringing about future reactions for all of our mixed activities, because our consciousness is mixed, our activities are mixed. Some well motivated, some not so well motivated, and so the reactions are coming for both of those things. So different degrees of happiness and distress are coming according to what we've done. It's a perfect system. It's so fair, actually. You know, it's quite amazing how, you know, we need corrected. Our consciousness needs to be corrected, and in the improper consciousness we carry out activities, and then by Krishna's perfect system we get a reaction which should teach us how to reform that consciousness. Of course, it doesn't work like that for everybody. On the spiritual path, people tend to be more introspective about these things and to see what's happening to them and why, and try to understand it and try to change. But without that introspection, people are just going through so many different degrees of dealing with difficulties and dealing with suffering without understanding why. But in the perfect system, those activities help us to change, help us to correct that consciousness. And you know, we don't know what's coming. Basically, we don't know what we've done in previous lives. We don't remember, which is probably just as well. It's kind of enough dealing with what we can remember that we've done in this life. You know, I was just thinking earlier how I spend a lot of time cringing, thinking about things I've done, things I wish I hadn't done, things I've said, things I feel I shouldn't have said, and sometimes it's really embarrassing, you know, when you remember, why did I say that? Why did I write that to that person? You know, why did I do that thing? And at the time you think, I'll never do it again. And then you do, you know. So it's enough to deal with remembering all the things from this life a lot of the time. But there's things from previous lives that we just don't remember at all. And we were reading recently in the Nectar of Devotion how these karmic reactions that are coming to us, they're in 4 different stages. And I can only ever remember 3 of them because 2 of them seem very similar to me. But one of them I remember is that there's the reactions that we're getting right now. So things that are maturing right now, whatever suffering we're going through at the minute, that's the matured reactions to things we've done in the past. And then there's things that have not yet fructified. They're like in seed form in the heart, and at some point in the future they're going to manifest, they're going to come out. And then the other one that I remember is another reaction of activities we perform, is that they can create the desire to perform them again, even if we don't want to. So that's another stage of, karma unfolding. So it's really complex. And one time, a couple of years ago, I had an astrological reading done. And I learned that in this lifetime I had 3 difficult phases to go through. They're 7-year phases each time. And they're called, as far as I can remember, Sade Satis. And the astrologer said, in general, the Hindu people, they hate to hear they've got Sade Satis in their chart. They're just like filled with dread, a really tough time. And what they are is, they're the fructifying of karma from a long time back. So it's not from recent lifetimes, it's from way back in history. It could be many lifetimes ago, and then that karma comes into the present life. And that's that's how it's described to me anyway. That's what the Sade Sati is. So, that's the problem with karma, is you just don't know when things are going to pop up. And even if for the past few lifetimes you've been trying to lead a reasonably pious life or religious life, still you can get something from hundreds of lifetimes back just popping into your chart. You've got to deal with it. But the positive thing is that there's a way to stop this process and get out of this system of actions and reactions. And when we act for the satisfaction of Krishna instead of acting for our own benefits or gains, then not only do we not get any karma for that activity, but we actually destroy the reactions to the things that we've already done. So that's another very positive aspect to understand in this particular verse, which is describing the different types of activities that there are. I mean, really it's just a choice between 2 things. You're either performing a material act or a spiritual act, and the thing may be the same, the activity may be the same, practically speaking, externally how it looks, but it's the intention and why you're doing it. And that's what makes the difference. And these things carry on then from one life to another. So again, to mention again the positivity of this, it's just such a wonderful benefit of spiritual life that anything we do is never lost, whereas the material activities at the end of life, they're finished. We spend so much time learning things. We have to learn how to eat and walk and speak. As a child, you've got to learn the most basic things. In the next life, you've got to learn them all over again and get educated all over again. And all the things you learned, all the things you studied, all the things you spent years or even decades acquiring knowledge, that's all gone. And next life, it's back to scratch, start learning something all over again. But spiritual life it's described like a spiritual bank account, so any progress we make, it's eternally there. It stays within the heart, and we carry on from wherever we left off. So even if we don't finish it in this lifetime, and even if we don't manage to achieve perfection, next life we're just carrying on. And there's a set of verses further into the Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter where Arjuna is asking about this. What if you take up the spiritual path but you don't complete it and you're not successful? Don't you just become like a riven cloud and you lose everything because you gave up material life, you didn't go for that, but you weren't spiritually successful either, so then what? Actually, I'm just going to read those verses. Starting in chapter 6, text 37. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist, who in the beginning takes to the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness, and thus does not attain perfection in mysticism? O mighty armed Krishna, does not such a man, who is bewildered from the path of transcendence, fall away from both spiritual and material success, and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? This is my doubt, O Krishna, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy this doubt. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Son of Prita, a transcendentalist engaged in auspicious activities does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. Or, if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. On taking such a birth, he revives the divine consciousness of his previous life, and he again tries to make further progress in order to achieve complete success, O son of Kuru. So, really nice and clear description of how there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to fear, we just carry on from where we were previously. And what's explained there is that if someone's been practicing for a short while, they may go to higher planets, or they may take birth in a wealthy family. But for someone who has been practicing the process of spiritual life for a long time, they'll take birth in a family of transcendentalists, and this is described as being of immense good fortune. Like, this is definitely the preferable of the two, because what happens is that the child from the very beginning of their life gets deep impressions and samskaras by being in the association of transcendentalists, saintly people, and their progress is really quick because they're getting it from the very start of their life. Whereas someone taking birth in a pious family, as opposed to transcendentalists or a wealthy family, they're in a good situation in one sense in life. There's not too much suffering, they've got a reasonably good start, but they're going to have to work harder to make that same kind of progress. It's described as well that, I think it's in, I think I read it in Burijan Prabhu's book, Study Guide to Bhagavad Gita, that if a yogi isn't successful and he goes to the higher planets, he'll achieve all the sense gratification that's provided there. But because he started the spiritual path, he'll quickly tire of it, and he'll lose the taste for the sense gratification, and then he'll want to carry on his spiritual life again. So, really, nothing to worry about, no loss. We just keep continuing. And I was fortunate enough to come across an article written by a devotee I know quite well, Prabhupada disciple, and it's actually very relevant to this verse. And he'd entitled the article Perfect Timing, and I was just about to speak on this verse, so it was perfect timing in that way as well. But he'd been exploring in which way devotees in this life, the life we were aware of, the only one we know of, come back to Krishna consciousness. Because Srila Prabhupada said several times that if we've come to Krishna consciousness, we've most likely started up in a previous life. So his article was looking at the way that our spiritual life starts to unfold again in this life, even if we weren't born into families of transcendentalists, families of devotees. And he made a few nice points. He was saying we may start off with a life that looks kind of unfortunate. We may even have troubled backgrounds and dysfunctional families, all kinds of difficulties. But often those situations are there to create a certain kind of experience which will help to foster within us the awakening that's needed so we can carry on from where we left off before. And he was saying, under the right timing and circumstances, the spiritual assets start to resurface. So he explained it that it's almost as if, or maybe not almost, maybe it is, the case that our spiritual life actually comes searching after us. We're kind of destined pretty much to carry on from where we were, because that consciousness has already begun the process of awakening, and it's just a matter of time before we feel that kind of inner determination or urge or inspiration to keep going. And he was saying that our whole life starts to unfold to accommodate, this next stage of the journey. So, because for a long time I used to wonder, well, if I started off in a previous life, then, why did I have to take birth in the particular situation I took birth in? Because, 1968, so, Prabhupada had come to the West, could have taken birth in the family of devotees. Things could have been different, but I had to wait until I was in my early 20s to meet the devotees, although I was hearing about them from my teens. But that question was there. But this article was really helping to understand how these things are not irrelevant, that our lives are, although looking just unfortunate or materialistic and not a very good start, are often really shaping us, and they're exactly what we needed to bring about this further search and inquiry for the next stage of the journey. And the more you hear devotees speak about what they went through, what brought them to Krishna consciousness, the more you can see that people often go through some kind of existential crisis where they just can't make any sense of the world, can't cope with the world, and that nothing makes sense anymore. It can be a very suffering time, but it can lead to those questions, lead to taking the spiritual path back up again. So we really can see in our own lives and the lives of spiritual practitioners that we know how this questioning and searching has often been there, right through life from the beginning. There's been a thread of that, and then it comes to a point where we're ready. We want spiritual life, and we carry on. So we can see this is not just theory. It's experience. We've experienced in our lives. We've seen it in the lives of others. I can see it with my own life, and I can see how it seemed natural for me to want some kind of spiritual path from as young as I could remember. I remember being about maybe 11, it's hard to say exactly, around about that age, and my parents had gone out one night and my grandfather was babysitting for me and my sister, and we were watching some TV program, something like Starsky and Hutch, something we watched regularly. But in this particular one, there was, kind of a shocking murder, and I became really afraid. And from that age onwards, I really needed to know what was going to happen at death and after death. So that desire to know what was coming next and what death was there in me. And then as I got older, into my teens, I started to instinctively feel that I should be a Christian, but I didn't know how to be. And it was just a suffering condition because I hadn't a clue what to do. And I ended up thinking I had to be really kind of good in a way that I didn't understand all of the time. And I didn't know how to do that. And it was just a big strain, so then I kind of abandoned it and went on with the life that most people lead. But that search and that feeling that I should practice some kind of spirituality was there, and then took some time, but some years later I came across the devotees, and then it, coming across Krishna consciousness, coming across the first books, it was so significant. It was answering all the questions that I'd had from a young age, and it was also like rediscovering something that I already knew. That when I came across it, I thought, of course, of course we're not our bodies, of course there's karma, of course there's Krishna. And it was such a relief. It was like rediscovering something that I'd long forgotten. And I remember thinking, how have I managed to live to this age without this knowledge? And I instinctively knew that, okay, life's not easy and I'm going to go through stuff again, difficulties, but it's never going to be as bad again now that I understand this knowledge, now that I have this understanding which I've somehow been deprived of, for the first 20 years. So in my own life I can see how, you know, spiritual life continues on from some previous start. And then another example, you know, I look at my daughter, and she's brought up, you know, with Krishna consciousness from birth, you know, brought up vegetarian whole life, brought up with chanting, deities, temple, you know, scriptures, all of these things. And I think a lot of, you know, these devotees born into devotee families are similar in a lot of ways. They grew up with a different approach than we have, you know, because we kind of join a movement, but they grew up with how can I explain it? I suppose what I saw in her was that she put absolutely no pressure on herself at any stage to try and become something, or to try and follow something because that was the right thing to do, because she should do it. But what happened instead was that there was a natural and gradual unfolding of the desire to practice a spiritual life in a I suppose the best way to say it is just in a very natural way. It came in its own time, in its own way, without any guilt, without any force or pressure, but she gravitated naturally towards certain things. And I think we see that in a lot of our children. They, you know, when the time comes, something naturally awakens. So it's very reassuring, and it's, you know, it's reassuring for our futures as well, you know, for, you know, life in our, you know, next bodies, that if we don't complete it this time, we don't make it in this one lifetime, that we will carry on. And another example as well, as we see devotees coming to, you know, Krishna consciousness, to this particular path. And you can see that some people start off with a very high level of consciousness and practice, and then you can understand from looking at them that they're obviously not beginning. So people are coming at all different stages. Some are just starting off, and some are already very developed in their understandings, their consciousness, and, you know, their devotion. So those are some kind of practical examples of how this is not just theory, but how we can actually see it by looking at ourselves and others that we know. But I just wanted to finish off really by going back again to the point about, which I started off with, about how it's not a sectarian thing, that this is a science of God consciousness, of, you know, Krishna is the name of God for this age. It's the most potent name of God to chant. This is the process that Lord Chaitanya gave us. It's the Yuga Dharma, and this is, you know, it's the highest knowledge. But at the same time, we're to try to understand and encourage this spirituality, you know, wherever we see it. And Srila Prabhupada, I can't remember if I read this out at the start of the class or not, but if I did, there's no loss. Srila Prabhupada saying in the CC, I think I did read it, but I'm going to read it again. There are different stages of devotional service and God realization. Strictly speaking, anyone who accepts the existence of God is situated in devotional service. So anyone who accepts that God exists is situated in devotional service. And another quote I came across from Prabhupada recently was, chant anywhere, whatever name you know. We don't say that it even must be Hare Krishna. But then he goes on to say, of course, chanting Hare Krishna is very nice, and it's, you know, it's the most effective process. But just to explain, you know, this inspiration for looking at things in a non-sectarian way for me came from listening to Mother Krishna Nandini's talks recently. You know, a lot of devotees know that she's, you know, very ill with very, you know, very highly progressed cancer. So she's been giving some talks from the hospice where she's gone now for, you know, her final time that she has left. And she's just an amazingly inspirational, you know, lady and devotee. She's initiated by Srila Prabhupada, and as far as I know, second initiated by His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami. Her husband is a Muslim, and they've done so much work, you know, compassionate, helpful work in helping people with their relationships and their marriages, and also helping people in interfaith understanding, how to see the similarities, how to see the differences. So she gives incredible talk, and I took down notes from it because it was so inspiring. I wanted to finish off by reading a few of these things because, you know, again, to explain why I'm speaking about this in relation to this verse, it just really struck me that this verse is so positive, and it's in relation to a whole scientific process that we've got, which explains the topmost knowledge. And we're so fortunate to have this complete, full understanding, to have this knowledge. And we want to try to, you know, spread this knowledge. We want to try to help other people to be able to, you know, make advancement on their path, in their spiritual lives. We want to be able to affect as many people as possible. So I'll read the points that she said. So she says, the time has come for us to figure out how we can ally ourselves with other servants of God. We have a particular unique approach and science to living and life, but God also has other servants who are sincere people, who are Muslims, Christians, Baha'i, etc. How can we ally ourselves? Then herself and Anutama Prabhu, who she was being interviewed by, went on to speak about how they both knew so many people from their work and travelling and meeting so many people. They both knew so many practitioners in other traditions who they felt were much more devout than they were, much more elevated, much more sincere. And, you know, that just because we have, you know, the great fortune to be given the highest knowledge and the full understanding, you know, we can't be complacent because other people are, you know, making great strides even without this. Then she went on to make the point that her understanding of this basic teaching, one of the first things we learn is that we're not the body, and her understanding of how to really, you know, assimilate that knowledge and understand it is to understand that it means not being sectarian, to be able to look at people in other traditions, you know, in other mats, in other religions, and to see that they're all servants of God, and we need to be able to work with them to try to spread God consciousness on the planet. And she said, how can we cooperate to make the whole world a better place? Connecting with another person means connecting with God in the heart of every single entity. How can I connect with another God-conscious person to get the job done? So very powerful. She said, it's not about becoming happy in my own little family circle, or even my own little community circle. It's about how the whole world can become happy. And then she finished off by, she asked a series of questions. She was talking about how we've all been going through this lockdown with the coronavirus. And she says, when we come out of this, what's going to be different? We should come out more kind, more compassionate, more dedicated, more understanding, better servants of God, with a willingness to open our hearts to other servants of God and figuring out how we can work together. And then she spoke about how her impression of Srila Prabhupada was that he was always trying to include as many people as possible. How can we include more people? And Srila Prabhupada would often say, it doesn't matter what religion one is, it doesn't matter what name of God they chant. What matters is that we encourage people to develop their spiritual lives in whatever way they will. And if they'll take up the chanting of Hare Krishna, that's the best and that's the topmost. But if they don't want to do it that way, then we've got to find some way to encourage them. So serve Krishna in everybody that you meet. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say about this verse for now, and I've gone over time already, and I don't even know if I can see any questions, if there are any, because I can look at the laptop and see if I can get that to come on. Okay, there's something, this something here from someone, I think. Yeah, there's some comments. I'll just, not exactly questions, but I'll just read them. Sonia says, Krishna is the only one who will give true relationship in real meaning and give unconditional love. And Sutan Prabhu says something very nice. So thank you, Sutan Prabhu. Yeah, so I don't see any questions, but I think that's been quite lengthy anyway. So thank you very much to anyone who was listening for giving me the opportunity to speak and to think about Krishna more, and to think about, you know, the goal of life and what I'm trying to achieve, and to become more motivated to try to take the philosophy seriously, and to reflect on these words of these devotees I'm quoting here, who are, you know, very dedicated, serious people, and who are trying to do something, you know, really important and special in the world, to try to follow in the footsteps of people like this, you know, to try to develop their qualities, to aspire for that at least, you know, to develop broad-mindedness and tolerance and humility and compassion, you know, and to feel the great fortune of having people to be inspired by. So everything is all good and all positive on the spiritual path. I shall end there. Thank you. Hare Krishna.